is the second of our civil luncheon lecture series. We will have another one coming up, and at the end of this event today, we'll have an announcement about what our next one will be. We want to offer a thank you to the Office of the Provost for the Academic Excellence Grant that we received in order to put this event on. We also want to, of course, thank our panelists for taking the time out of their day, and of course, thank all of you for showing up today for this event. And we also want to offer our thanks to the Institute for Civil Discourse and Democracy in Manhattan. Unfortunately, their representative is, their plane got grounded today, so they're not able to be here, unfortunately, but we will offer our thanks for them for giving us some sound advice about how to structure this. A few of the ground rules. You have a copy of the ground rules for public discussion at each table. You can take a look at that. We're going to try to follow that model as closely as possible. And you can see also on the overhead that we have how we're going to structure this. So following the introductions, there will be time for each panelist to come up. They will be speaking at the podium to present the information that they have. And then we will go back to each particular table, and I'll give you specific instructions about what we would like for you to do. And at the end of your discussion, each table will generate questions that will come back to the moderator, and I will present those straight back to the panelists. Okay, this is a complex topic, isn't it? Very complex topic. Lots and lots of perspectives, not something simple. So that's part of why we decided to have the structure that we've decided on today, in order to try to keep things as civil as possible in terms of dissecting a topic of this nature. I'd like to introduce our panelists and give a brief bio on each one so you know who's talking to you. In alphabetical order. First off is Levi Esses. Levi is the Assistant Director of Student Services here at K-State Salina. He has a master's degree from Wichita State. He is the chair of the Critical Incident Response Team. Did I get that right? Critical Incident Response Team here in Salina. And this is his 6th year of employment here at K-State Salina. Second one, alphabetically, is Dr. George Yurkovich. George received his MD from KU. He's been a certified psychiatrist here in Salina for 22 years. He's the medical director of Meridian Behavioral Health, and he also helps run a partial hospitalization program in Junction City for current military servicemen and women. Next on the list is Mr. Darrell Wilson. Darrell is a veteran of the United States Army. He's been affiliated as a certified Kansas law enforcement officer for 41 years. During that time, Mr. Wilson was with the Salina Police Department for 22 years. He was a sheriff of Saline County for 12 years. And he also served as the executive director of the Kansas Sheriff's Association for 11 years. And our final panelist is Mr. Ed Zock. Ed is a local artist. Ed is he's a veteran of the United States military. He served in the Navy. This is his 4th year as the chair of the Salina Area Friends of the NRA. And he is in his 5th year as the president of the local Prairie Long Rifles Association. And those folks are enthusiasts of black powder weaponry. Did I get that right?
That's correct.
That's correct. Okay. So with no further ado, I think we will start this off with each speaker, and we'll give them about 5 minutes each, and then we'll go back to the tables.
Thanks, Joel. You guys hear me all right? Everyone hear me back there? Okay. Just to kind of give you a little bit more background of who I am, again, as Joel said, I'm Levi Esses. I'm the Assistant Director of Student Services here at K-State Salina. Before that, I was the Director of Housing at Bethany College down in Lynchburg. My job today is to really talk about violence on campus and give some statistics about violence on campus. It's been more and more occurrence in terms of in the media, in terms of things that have happened in Newtown, Connecticut, those types of things. So I'm going to kind of talk a little bit about that today. As you know, the Kansas Boards of Regents a couple years ago established a policy for all universities that college campuses are weapons-free. State law passed that at every entrance that you walk into a state building, there's a no guns policy or no weapons policy on the entrance doors. The exception to that is for university campuses, university officials like police officers, security officers that are in their employment can carry a weapon if needed. And they have to make sure that they have safe possession, they have it locked up and in a safe place in storage of weapons. In terms of violence on campus, if we look at that, in 2008, on college campuses and dormitories, there were 20 aggravated assaults and 25 forcible sex offenses recorded per 100,000 students. In that same year, the FBI statistics showed that 275 aggravated assaults and 29 sex offenses occurred per 100,000 Americans. Okay? Murder and non-negligent manslaughter are grouped together in the records, and just 0.1% of those tragedies were reported per 100,000 college students. While just the general public, 5.4% were reported for every 100,000 Americans. And so looking at 2011 statistics, in the Kansas Board of Regents system, including Haskell, Indian Nation, and Washburn, there are over 103,000 students enrolled in those universities. On campus in 2011, the arrests for possession of weapons, there were just 20 arrests in that 2011 period for weapons. In 2010, there were 14. In 2009, there were 9. Policy violations, university policy violations. Every university has their own weapons policy in terms of what they can and can't do. In 2010, there were just 5 policy violations. In 2009, there were just 3. And in 2009, there were 17. Now, those policy violations, some of them probably go unnoticed or unreported, because students on a college campus, if you think of the hunters that we have on a college campus, they could have their rifles, their guns in the trunk of their car, and they may not know. And so those sometimes go unreported. Other times they do get reported, and those are policy violations that get reported to my shop. In 2009, 10, and 11, there were 0 murders in the state of Kansas on a college campus. And the same percentage, which is in 2008, so 0.1% of 100,000 students happened to those tragedies. Here at K-State and K-State Salina, happy to say that there were 0 weapons arrests in the 3-year period, 11, 10, and 09, and 0 policy violations that happened at K-State. In 2011, there were 2 arrests in Manhattan for weapons policies. The gun control letter that came out after Newtown, Connecticut, there's a letter that was written that opposed the banning of guns in schools, and it talked about the ban of selling guns to those without background check. 350 college presidents signed that letter of over 4,100 college presidents. So only 350 of those college presidents signed that letter stating that they wanted stronger gun control. So with that said, my time's running short. College campuses appear, based on the numbers, that college campuses appear to be a safe environment for our students. And so those are kind of the facts that I wanted to promote to you and to the Department of Education. You can look those things up as well. So that is my time, and I'll give it up to our next panel.
I'm Dr. Yurkovich, and I don't really have personally much knowledge of guns. I'm a photographer, and when I shoot digital. But I think really the major issue that I mean, my perspective is from a public safety point of view. The American Academy of Pediatrics has come out twice this year stating that the most effective way, reliable way of decreasing the likelihood of children and adolescents being injured by firearms is to get them out of our homes and get them out of our environment. But the specific way that I encounter this is with suicide. Attempting suicide with a gun is considerably less forgiving than attempting with poisoning or other means. About 10,000, about 19.5 out of 100, these are World Health Organization statistics, about 19 out of 100,000, 19.5 out of 100,000 people in the world die by suicide. The most likely way of dying by suicide is in terms of completing suicide, is with a gun. We lose about 10,000 people a year in the United States secondary to completed suicide with guns. Now, the attitudes towards guns, I think to some extent, are understood if you look at the experiences in urban settings versus in rural settings. Now this is a rural setting that we are in. In urban settings, for every person that dies by suicide with a gun, 5 die by homicide. If you go into more of the rural settings, it's the opposite. For every one that dies by homicide, 5 die by suicide. And so in a rural setting, we tend to look at it as a mental health problem. And the problem isn't the gun, the problem is who has the gun. Whereas in the urban setting, the gun is more likely to be vilified. So the attitudes are more likely more in favor of gun control. So I think that perspective. This was a Washington Post article that was in that publication this year. But again, my main concerns are from the public health point of view, and we need to. I think something needs to be done. Personally, I don't think that the way to deal with this is with more guns, but I guess that's what we'll discuss.
Did I turn this thing on? Well, I'm Darrell Wilson, and I was a lot of years in law enforcement here in Salina and Saline County. And I've been very interested in this gun situation and what's going on. I think it's more now we're talking about the type of guns that are used. And the big conversations are about the automatic or semi-automatic weapons and the number of bullets that they will hold in the clips. And whether now they're talking about reducing them down from 16 to 10. And I really don't think that is going to make that much difference in somebody that's determined to do the kind of shooting that had gone on in Sandy Hook. Or is a semi-automatic rifle or military type weapon. If those of you that know about guns know that most of the automatic, semi-automatic pistols today can hold 15 or so rounds, and it's pretty easy to change a clip if you're so inclined to do a lot of shooting like that. So I don't really have a hard time about the size of the clips. It wouldn't matter to me if they're 10 or 16 or 15. I don't have one. I don't use one, but so there's probably, if you've noticed lately in the news, there's as many people, or a lot of situations right here in our community where people are injured with knives. As a matter of fact, we just had one the other day where there was a cutting of some kind. So if you're inclined to commit a violent act like that, knives are probably as prevalent as anything. And I'm sure we're not thinking about making people register to carry knives. The other, also, the latest deal is in Boston with the explosion. Well, I don't think I'd like to go register if I want to buy a pressure cooker, but that seems to be one of the problems now. The problem, I believe, is like the doctor said, the problem isn't the guns, the problem is the people. And if we can identify who may be so inclined to do such a thing. One good example is the deal in Aurora at the theater. Apparently he was identified as a problem in school, in college there, and they expelled him from the campus so he couldn't come back, but somehow wasn't any communication between the school and the police department so that they could have checked him out. Perhaps if they'd have gone to his apartment and talked to him, they might have been able to stop that. There are 5,300 concealed carry licenses in the state of Kansas, which really isn't a great deal. There's probably 2 million people or thereabouts in the city. Another thing that has been a topic is whether or not to allow carry the schools, to the teachers and the professors to carry weapons. And I am totally against that. I think that could cause more trouble than what we do have in our schools today. One of the things that we worked with was we had responsibility for court security, and I had armed officers over there. The hallways of the courts were always full of people coming and going, and I always worried about somebody pulling a gun and one of the officers having to feel like they have to return fire or something, and you know somebody else is going to get hit. That's an innocent person. But I'm being waved at, so thank you.
I'm Ed Zock, and I'm representing the Friends of the NRA today. Hopefully everybody can hear me a little bit better now. Can you hear me out there okay? The number one thing I wanted to let everybody know is that there's the NRA and Friends of the NRA. And at the NRA, it's the political side, and they're the people going to court, fighting for gun rights, so we the people can have our guns and we can go out and do shooting, sports, and hunting, and own our guns. Then we have the Friends of the NRA, and we're about safe shooting, hunter sports, safety, education, range development. Because this is the 21st year of Friends of the NRA, and there's about 18,000 grants across the United States. We raise money at our banquets, and then people within the state apply for the money for their own club, like a 4-H group, or Women on Target, or for the Sheriff's Department if they want to develop a range. And then all that grant money, there was 18,000 grants in the United States last year that's been applied for. And all of our money goes for youth education, law enforcement, hunter education, conservation, marksmanship training. There's about 20 million lives that are impacted by all the money and the funds that we raise. There's 180 million has been raised over those the last 20 years. There's been 2,216 grants were awarded in 2010. So people are applying and using the money. At the local level, we turn all of our money in. There's about 24 groups in the state of Kansas. That goes to the state fund. Half of that money goes back to national headquarters for national events, and the other half stays right here in the state of Kansas. There's about 30,000 volunteers that are involved in this organization that help out. It's in all 50 states, so everybody's using it. And there's about 205 million people attended all the banquets and the functions last year. And just for a list, we have youth programs, training education, range development, women's programs, conservation, special grants, and endowments. And last year, there was $140,000 that was given the groups here in Kansas. And part of those are the National Rifle Association, the Butler County 4-H Training Program, Chisholm Trail Antique Gun Association, Fort Hays State University, they have a shooting team there that's not supported by the school also. That's all private, and they got one of the grants. Gary County 4-H, Garden City Trap Club, Jefferson County 4-H. So a lot of this money is going for youth training and the safe handling of firearms. And for me personally, I think that's what part of the problem is. People take the guns out, they go shoot them, they don't know what they're doing. They start out young, you grow up with them. When I was young, I went out with my grandfather with a 410, 22 over and under, went out and shot rabbits and birds with it. A few years later, my uncle took me out. So I grew up with it. I was raised right around this area. I moved into Slide in about 8th grade. So I was been kind of around it and use it regularly. I mean, I still hunt today. I've been deer hunting for the last 25 years. And I don't need to have a clip that has 14 bullets in to shoot a deer. Most of the time I go out on season, I shoot one bullet. When I'm doing the black powder stuff, that's the antique guns. So there was a senator that said antique guns and black powder weapons would not need to be classified for legal backgrounds. You can buy your black powder gun without having a background check.
Okay, thank you, speakers. Now it's going to go back to the tables. You'll notice that there are pencils and there are some note cards. And here's your instructions for each of the tables. A few things I'd like for you all to do. First off, just to break the ice a little bit, go around and introduce yourselves to each other. Explain in just a few words why you're here, what you want to get out of this. Okay, so start with that. I'll give you a couple minutes to do that. I'll give you some more instructions. That's the set. Okay, so we can move on a little bit here. I'd like to see this conversation. The next thing that I'd like for you guys to do, everyone grab a note card or a piece of paper, write down a couple questions that you personally would like to ask of any one of the panel members or specifically to a panel member. And then spend a few minutes sharing your questions amongst your table. And decide as a table on one or two questions that you would like to have offered towards the panel members. So your own questions first, then share your questions and decide as a table. Okay, I think we're ready to get going again. We appreciate your patience with this process. We're trying to sort through the questions, make sure there's no repetition or anything like that. We're ready for our first question. This one goes to Mr. Ed Zoff. Ed, does the NRA oppose background checks, and if so, why?
I would say, can y'all hear me good? Yes. I would say the NRA does not oppose background checks. At every banquet we go to, and I've been to different gun shows, a lot of those guys are dealers over there anyway, and they do a background check. There is no way somebody is going to take a gun from our banquet without a background checks. I'm sure that NRA prefers background checks.
Okay, thank you, Ed. Here's our next question. This one is not addressed to anyone specific. What role does mental health and mental wellness play in gun control? Who wants that one?
First of all, I'm very amused that the NRA and the gun lobby has suddenly become a friend of mental health. These very strange bedfellows, because these same legislators are ones who have will try to cut funding at every place they can. But that's my own personal statements. I've got that out of the way. But here's what I would say about where does mental health, this is really a very broad issue. I think very minimally. I think the current background check has something about that if you've been committed to a mental institution or something, I'm not exactly sure what the wording is, that you can't own a gun or you can't get a gun. That being said, I know of a patient who was discharged from Prairie View who drove down from Prairie View to Wichita and bought a gun at a pawn shop and shot himself in the parking lot. So those are, it's very easy to get around some of that. What I would say very minimally is this. If you have a friend, and this is, if you want to take one thing, because I'm mainly interested in this from a public safety point of view, and I've had quite a few patients who have killed themselves with firearms, even though we've taken precautions to get them out of the house. But what I would say is, if you have a friend who is depressed, and this is somebody you can talk to, don't be afraid to bring up the topic of suicide. You're not going to suggest it to them. They're probably already thinking about it. If they are depressed and they have guns at the house, offer to take them out for safekeeping. When people are suicidal, it's not a pervasive state, it's an impulse. And if you can take the guns out of the house, keep them someplace safely, then give them back later when the crisis is past, you will possibly be able to avert a tragedy. So I guess, I mean, I could talk on and on about this, but there's one important thing I would want everybody here to keep in mind, is if you have a friend who's depressed, feel free to talk to them about suicide. And if they have guns, get them out of the house. And of course, direct them towards getting some help.
Thank you, Doctor. Here's our next one, and that's also not addressed to anybody. We'll see who wants this one. Psychological testing before purchasing a gun. Yes or no?
I would, I mean, can I take that one? I think that would be pointless. Because the tests are not really designed for that. They throw out, which psychological test would you use? I mean, they throw out a broad net, and I don't think they would, the idea is not a bad one, but I don't think it would achieve what the person is wanting. In other words, disturb people from getting guns.
Daryl, did you have something to add?
See that turn this thing on. Well, I'm in favor of psychological tests and background tests. I think, and even though I'm sure they won't catch everybody, I think that there's at least an effort to try to identify somebody that could have a problem. And the one I keep coming back to is the guy in Aurora in the theater that shot up all those people, and who was kicked off the campus of the university, and somehow or other the university didn't notify the police that they thought the guy was mentally ill and had suicidal and homicidal tendencies. If the police had known that, they could have stopped that. So I know it's not going to catch everybody, but I think it's a good idea. I'm in favor of background checks. I'm not in favor of registering guns. I think that's getting into your private affairs and if you want to own a gun, there's nobody's business.
Okay, thank you. Told you guys this was complicated, wasn't it? Okay, different answers all over. Here's another one. Second Amendment protects us from government out of control. How does limiting magazines and identifying all guns and everyone who has them support that end?
I don't think it does support that end by limiting guns. The first part of your question is that the Second Amendment is protecting us. And the second part of that question said, how does it limit it? Can you repeat that again?
Certainly. Second Amendment protects us from government out of control. How does limiting magazines and identifying all guns and everyone who has them support that end?
It does not support that end. That's how I didn't have to answer it.
Well, I would beg to differ. I don't think the Second Amendment protects us against government out of control. It talks about certain rights, one of which is the right to bear arms. It doesn't doesn't say the right to bear any arms, all arms. And the Supreme Court has said it is reasonable for local jurisdictions to regulate arms to some extent. So, again, a complicated issue.
I'd say this about that. This assault weapon that they talk about that's so much in the news, you know, is no different than a hunting rifle that's a semi-automatic rifle. And the only thing they do have is a clip that allows them to carry more bullets. But it looks like something you'd use in wartime. And I don't know, not a deer hunter, but I don't know why you'd want one in the first place to hunt deer or hunt rabbits with. But they seem to be desirable. But they're really no different than an automatic or semi-automatic deer rifle or a semi-automatic pistol in regard to how they fire.
I agree with what you're saying there, Darrell. The reason they look like that military style gun is for salesmanship from the manufacturer, because it looks cool and it looks like an assault weapon. So then the manufacturer, they're just marketing that product like that.
I agree.
Well, I think what protects us from government out of control is the fact that we have a democracy and the fact that we have free arms of the government and we have checks and balances. It is not because people are armed.
Okay, we're still trying to get through the questions. Hopefully you guys will be patient. I know some of you have to go soon. Hopefully this will be short and sweet. This is a two-part question. Are responsible gun owners a threat? Do we want to regulate them?
No.
I agree, they're not a threat, and that is what they're trying to do is regulate. With all this new gun laws and all that control, that's what they're trying to do right now.
I would say that responsible gun owners are not a threat. But I would say if your responsible gun owner is depressed, get the guns out of the house.
All right. This one specifically for Darrell Wilson. Why is it a bad idea to arm school personnel?
Because I think that, first of all, school personnel aren't there to fight a war in the halls or in the rooms of the schools. And it's really an awesome responsibility to hang a gun on somebody and expect them to defend the schoolroom or the halls of school. Number two, it takes, as anybody that's involved in law enforcement or that uses a weapon or has a weapon, it takes a lot of training, and not just one day, the one time in a certain time. You have to get on the range. You have to train all the time and keep up on your abilities. And the big thing, when I was sheriff, we had responsibility for the security at the courthouse. And even though we had trained law enforcement officers in the courthouse, I always worried about if the hallways are full of people and you had a bad guy who don't care who he shoots, he don't care who he brings down, and you come up against him, him or her with your pistol, you're going to hesitate to shoot and probably end up getting yourself shot. I just don't think that we want to put our teachers in that position.
I would echo Mr. Wilson. Thank you for being the voice of reason on this issue.
That's the first my wife did say.
I would say it also is a lot of confusion if you have school personnel in a serious situation. Authorities come in and everyone's got a gun. It creates a lot of confusion as well in terms of those situations.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen. Now this one's a little long, so bear with me. Why does the statement, guns don't kill people, people kill people, exist when the states with the highest gun ownership have a 114% higher murder rate with guns than the states with lowest gun ownership rates? Did you understand that?
I understand, but I don't know. I don't know what state you're talking about.
I'm not sure either.
Well, if I may comment on this issue, I don't know about the murder rates, but if you look at a state like Wyoming versus a state like Massachusetts, state of Wyoming has higher suicide rates, not higher amount of suicides, because there's only 500,000 people living in Wyoming. But in terms of the rate of completed suicides, they have a higher rate of suicide simply because there's more people attempting with guns. So it is a rather significant public health issue. If you're under 30 years of age, your chances of dying from illness are not very high. They're going to be from trauma, from accidents, or from gun-related issues, especially in the urban settings, you know, where 5 people died by homicide relative to 1 suicide relative to guns.
Okay, here's one specifically to Dr. Yurkovich. In your opening remarks, you stated, "I think something needs to be done." In your professional opinion, what needs to be done?
Well, gee, thanks for asking. I mean, that's one reason. I think that's one reason we're having this discussion, and I'm glad that this discussion is a rational one. There's so much emotion associated with this that we are almost paralyzed into inactivity. I think a lot of things need to be done, and I think it needs to be done on the political level. But what I would say, I think in terms of, I don't know what policies need to be enacted, but again, I'm going to reiterate that in terms of on a personal level, what can we do? I can't reiterate the need to keep guns away from people who are likely to kill themselves or who are talking about it. We need to feel comfortable doing that. Societal attitudes change. In the past, I mean, when I was going to college in the 70s, it was kind of rude if you saw your friend who was drunk, who was going to go drive home. It was kind of rude, or you know, you were kind of insinuating you weren't a real man if you would say, well, hey, could I give you a ride home, or could I take your keys? I mean, that was kind of forbidden. You didn't do that. Years ago, I had a patient tell me years ago when her husband would come home drunk, he would come home and start beating her, and she called the police, and the police told him to go out for a drive to calm down. Now, so we can see that societal attitudes change. So I think one of the things right now is we feel real uncomfortable bringing this issue up with somebody who's a friend or an acquaintance, a spouse, or something like that. So I think that's something that we need to be aware of. We need to feel free to have that conversation.
Okay, thank you. We have time for just a couple more questions. What's the difference between registering a car and registering a gun? It seems odd we register cars and require licenses to drive, but not for guns.
Well, I don't know. I've thought about that also. There's a lot more people killed with cars than there are with guns. And we're kind of a strange society. We build a car that'll run 150 miles an hour, but you can't drive 150 miles an hour. So it's the same with this deal with guns. We're going to allow or disallow guns with that can shoot 18 shells, but one bullet will kill you, so you don't need 18. So I really don't know. I think it's important that we register cars, but I don't think you should have to tell the government what property you own, like a gun or a pressure cooker or whatever.
Well, actually, I would say, this is an interesting point because I was listening to talk radio, and they were discussing this issue, and somebody suggested that the assets of Lanza's mother, who was the shooter in the most recent school massacre, that her assets should be confiscated to compensate the victims because she knew that her son was disturbed and allowed him to have guns. Personally, I think that guns should be registered. I think if your gun is involved in some kind of a crime or some kind of a murder and there's not a police report that it was stolen, I think you should be held civilly liable.
Another thing I might make a point on is guns, cars are taxable. Guns are. I mean, ongoing tax.
Okay, I think we have time for just one more question. This is an interesting one. How do gun-free zones work to prevent mass murders? If they know they will not be met with a gun, wouldn't it be more inviting for gun violence?
They met, have somebody at the door with a gun.
Right. They won't be met with any gun.
Well, I think there's a point there. I think that if somebody has a plan to assault a school like we've had lately, and they know that there's somebody there that's armed, they may think twice. But if you really are dedicated, you can, the person that's there at the school guarding can be taken down pretty easy, pretty quick, because they aren't expecting something like that. The person that's committing the crime has a plan, they know what they're going to do. So I'm not saying you shouldn't have armed people in the school. I'm saying you shouldn't arm teachers.
I think there were 2 armed guards at Columbine, and they made an attempt to take down the shooters. But the issue was they didn't know who to shoot or where.
Yeah.
You know, I mean,
You get
some of the
kids
things
on
that,
the-
yeah, exactly. Some of the things that Mr. Wilson was talking about in these situations.
But I think that's the reason some of these schools are being attacked, because they know, there's no guns there. Oh, I'm gonna go to the school, and they know nobody's there to stop them.
Well, you can go about anywhere where there's no guns. You go downtown,
Go to the mall.
Go to the bank.
Well, I think one of the things, I know that one of the arguments has been that if you look at places that are gun-free zones, for example, the movie theaters or something like this, that had they not been gun-free, I mean, somebody has said that this particular theater in Aurora, Colorado was gun-free and the other ones weren't, and that's why he chose this. I think this is all conjecture, and the actual amount of instances that happen like this are so few that you can't make any meaningful statistical analysis to be able to ferret this out. And I think it just comes down to personal prejudice in terms of
Where they're going.
no, I mean this idea that if everybody were gunned up, that like if we all were armed, that this would somehow make this a safer room. I think it's vacuous, but that's the direction that kind of argument is going.
Okay, again, unfortunately, we're not able to get to everybody's questions, but we do appreciate your participation. Now, for just the last couple minutes, concluding remarks from the panelists. What is the takeaway that you would like for your audience to have? What would you like for them to do? It's open field, just a couple minutes each.
And I would say that, the universities across the country are aware of the situations. As I stated, the university is a safe environment, and I think as more and more procedures, policies are in place, as they said, you're never going to stop everything. But I think for the most part, at our universities, I think our students have a peace of mind that they can go into a classroom and not be afraid of gun violence, and that they can go to that place where they're actually getting educated and get their degrees. So.
I'd just like to remind everybody that I think that a lot of it has to do with being hunter safety and learning how to use a gun. It's not necessarily at a young age or as an adult. You don't know how to handle it. Get some training from somebody, from grandpa, big brother, an organization, and use those resources. And one other thing I wanted to pass on to everyone on you want to write this down, you go to www.friendsofnra.org. It'll show you where grant money's going, what people are doing, what the package is, give you all the information. You can contact me if you need to. Glad to talk to any of you. Thank you.
Well, I would say, if you say that guns don't kill people, people kill people, then you need to check the people out. 90% of the population supports universal background checks. The majority of the NRA membership supports such. I think we need to find ways to make make sure that people who shouldn't have guns don't get them. On a personal level, what I would say is if you have a friend who is depressed, someone you know, you're worried about them, they have guns, get them out of the, feel comfortable bringing it up, get the guns out of the house, give them back when the crisis has passed. But attempting suicide with a gun is very unforgiving. So that would be my take-home message.
My take-home message is, guns are here to stay. We better learn how to deal with it. And when you do, if we ever, and we never will in my opinion, take the guns away from the law-abiding citizens, the bad guys are still going to have guns. And thank you for inviting me here. I'm not invited very much to this anymore.
It's been our pleasure. It's been our pleasure. Okay, thank you, panelists. Let's give a round of applause. And that concludes this event. You are free to leave. I'm sure some of our panelists have some time to stick around a little bit.
Next month, the next.
Oh, next month.
Next month.
What's?
Weren't you gonna announce the?
I didn't get, is there, what? Oh, it is. Sorry about that. We're organized here, I promise. Okay, the next one, Thursday, May 9th, federal health insurance. What happens next? That should be a good one. So thank you for showing up today, folks. Really appreciate it.